Be seated.
Now, we know for some of you, this might be quite different than what you expected, but you have to admit, if a church needs to have a business meeting, this isn't a bad way to have one, isn't it? One of the things that I want to do is just talk a little bit about the past, a little bit about possibly might be coming, and then one request at the end. Let me start off with this. I had some free time a couple weeks ago, and so I got to do what I love to do. I went out and got to play some golf, and so as I made my way to the first tee on my golf cart, I met a gentleman. He's the starter, and as I needed to wait for the group in front of me, he went through the typical questions. The starter lets you know when you're up and it's your time, but in that time, he's got some questions. He asked me my name, and I told him, and when I moved to Lexington 6 years ago, and then he said, so what's your occupation? And this is when it gets interesting. I said, I'm a pastor, and he said, well, of what church? I said, First Alliance, and his head went back, and his eyes got big. And then he said, and I've quoted athletes, actors, pastors, and theologians, but I've never quoted golf course starters. And then he said, First Alliance. I've heard so many things, so many good God things that he's doing at that church. I've just heard so many great things about what God's doing at that church. And then he proceeded to talk about what he's heard about our church. And he said, well, you're up. So I proceeded to hit my tee shot. It went off into the high rough. And he said, well, good thing your church is better than your golf game. And I said, where's the love? I said, where is, but it's true. It's true. This year has been a year marked by grace, and it's been marked by divine favor, that God has truly blessed us as a church, and it's all of God. But I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for how you've responded to what God is doing. You've given of your time, and you've given of your energy. You've given of yourselves. Specifically, you've gotten creative and courageous in helping people find parking spots and helping find seats. This has disrupted many of us who like a routine, and you haven't had that gift. But you said yes, and because of that, you've made room for people. It means so much. We've not just given lip service to being a church that reaches the next generation. From that of children in elementary schools to the young professionals, they are finding a place here, and they're finding ownership of ministries here. And I think the long-term benefit of that on Christ and his church in the world is just going to be unfathomable to us. Thank you for that. And then also, we truly are becoming an intergenerational church where groups are gathering of multi-generations and seeking God together. I remember one time I was at a prayer meeting and I counted 6 generations from 8 to 88 that were praying together and seeking the Lord together. And I said, this truly is beautiful what God is doing. We truly have experienced God's grace and his favor this past year. But that was last year. What about this upcoming year? What might God have for us? Well, this past February, I preached on a text from Luke chapter 5 where I told a story of about 4 friends who had to rip the roof off of a house to lower their friend to Jesus. Now, we're not ripping the roof off of anything, but there is a principle there. You see, they had to rip the roof off the house because of the great crowds. And when Jesus shows up, people show up. And Jesus has shown up here all over and over and over. And because our hearts long to be with our Creator, people will come here. And we, like those 4 friends, might have to become courageous and creative to help others experience the presence of God. That might be our calling, and I believe that will be our calling in the upcoming year. So let me give you 4 things. 2 things are in the works, and 2 things that will happen. Easter is April 20th this upcoming year, and we are in conversation with Dunbar High School, and we have a hope and a desire and a prayer that we as a church collectively can meet in one place for Easter to celebrate and to sing about all that God is doing through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It allows us to be a high invite church. Come and hear about the resurrection. It allows us to proclaim the resurrection in the city, that which I believe God desires his church to do. It was never meant, I believe, the resurrection to just be proclaimed amongst ourselves. We know it, but it's meant to be proclaimed in the city. And this would allow us the ability to proclaim Christ is raised amongst the people. And it's just a whole exciting possibility for us. So that is in the works. The other thing that is in the works is we are looking at parking, specifically that front parking area. Now, if you've seen the slope of that area, that's going to take some investigating. We're investigating, number one, is it doable? Number two, is it wise? And so as we have some preliminary drawings and as we have some preliminary conversations with the city, if this is something we believe that is wise, we will keep you informed with regards to costs and the amount of parking spots that we would receive. Until then, we're also investigating that good old shuttle service that so many people have come to grow and love. But we have to kind of be prepared for the spike that happens every August, because this past August, we spiked in attendance and we retained almost 500 people. And so if that happens again, we will be in a position to where we need to kind of begin to stack people all over the building once again. Well, one of the things that is going to happen is our lower auditorium has been remodeled to where this used to be able to hold about 70 people in overflow. Now that will be able to handle 200 people in overflow and with a better quality. We've got new video screens, better video, better sound. We want to make that place where people feel like, yeah, I can really worship God here together. Intimacy and options is a high value for me, and we believe that this will be a great kind of addition to our church to where people can feel known and in a smaller venue and yet have the muscle of a larger church. The last thing is the following. I don't have any announcement of a second campus. I don't have any announcement for a new building. But I do have an announcement of on August 11th, we are adding a fourth service. Okay? So, as we've looked over what is our next steps, we kind of, as a staff, we talked and said, yep, this is the right step for us. We didn't want to do an evening service because so many of our life groups and discipleship groups happen in the evening. And that's really the heartbeat and the muscle of any church. And so our 8:15 service continues to gather traction. That's a great high energy service. Please consider that. 9:30 is always packed. 11 is electric. And we believe that we can continue to gather and that college crowd at 12:30 and some people that really like to sleep in. And so we believe that we can do that. You'll hear some more information about the details coming your way. And when people ask, will 4 services be hard? I say possibly, but not as hard as 6. And so that's how I'm looking at it. And so, but one of the things to know is this, is the church is not about attending. It's not about attending, it's about becoming. You becoming that which God has created you to be, and you've not arrived to that yet. I haven't and you haven't. So we still need to be investigating. And we becoming whom God's called us to be as a church. How might that happen? Well, two things. I'm going to ask you to take a step and then to seek his presence. Take a step and seek his presence. You've heard us talk about worship plus 2, up, in, and out, where you commit to a worship service. That's this experience. That you commit to a growing group. That you would find if you haven't already, find a growing group. Many of us, because I've been here 6 years and I know many of you in the 6 years, you're entering a new life stage. Now you've entered the stage of empty nesters, or now you've entered a new stage of parenting, or you've now entered a new stage of life. You need relationships in that new stage. And God will provide you the relationships to help you become and navigate this new stage. If you're not in a growing group, please consider being in one. out is with regards to giftedness, is that God's given you some gifts to be used in the life of his church, and we thrive when everybody uses his gifts. Now, I've heard people talk to me and saying, hey, I serve so much in my ministry or my workplace all throughout the week. It is so great to come to a place and just kind of rest and relax. I don't know if we can do that anymore, folks. We need everybody. Says, God, you've given me gifts. You've given me ability. How are you asking me to invest them in the life of the local church? Number one is take a step, and the second one is seek his presence. And specifically this, we have a friend of First Alliance. He's spoken in this pulpit multiple times, and he said, Paul, First Alliance is at a crossroads. We will either become a consumer-based church or we will become a presence-based church. Consumer-based churches are kind of where they grow and people kind of come and leave and no one really knows them. But a presence-based church is where they come and they gather and they experience the presence of God amongst them when they gather. For that reason, I've leaned on Moses so much this past year, wanting to be a place where God's presence is felt amongst his people, because Moses has this huge ask of God. Go to Pharaoh, say, let my people go. Who wants that assignment? He feels overwhelmed by this challenge. And many days I have been in my office not knowing what to do, not knowing what the next step is. And I go to Moses because I feel overwhelmed. And I remember what God told Moses, and he's told me this over and over. He said, Moses, I will be with you. I'm not going to answer all your questions, and I'm not going to quickly solve your problems, but I'm going to grant you my presence, and my presence is enough. There's a time when the nation of Israel hears from God that they're going to go to the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. But God says, my presence will not go with you. And Moses responds, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us. God's presence, God himself, is more important than any gift that he might give, because he is the greatest thing that he can give. And the presence of God is the absolute must-have for the people of God. You see, when we experience God's presence, hearts get changed. People keep going. It's life-giving. It's transformative. And we don't need another church just to do church. That when we gather, we experience him together. A taste of heaven among us when we gather. That is my hope, and that is my prayer. For that reason, I'm going to ask you to pray this prayer when you remember First Alliance, either after this service or during the week, and more specifically in one specific time. Pray this prayer, Lord, would you grant us more of your presence? Would you grant us more of yourself? The Lord goes where he's wanted. And could you imagine us praying this all week long? And could you imagine praying this prayer as we're driving to church? I think it's the most underutilized time in the life of a church every Sunday. When you're driving to church with your family, you're driving to church with your spouse, you're driving to church by yourself, and you're just simply driving and you're thinking of this moment, and you make this your prayer. Sorry, eyes open. You make this prayer, Lord, grant us your presence. Grant us your presence when we worship. Grant us your presence in those classes. Grant us your presence in all that we experience. And imagine when we gather, he does. And you walk away and you're different, not because you heard a preacher or you sang a song, but you are in the presence of the living God. And you can keep going, and you're stronger, and you know that you've met him. You see, when it comes to God, how is never the issue, but who. All the hows in your life, how's that going to happen? That's no problem for God. But God asks one question, who? Who's going to seek me? Who's going to call out to me? Who's going to pursue me? Who's going to treasure me? Who's going to long for me? And when he finds that who, may it be us. He's with us. May that be our church, our people, our body this upcoming year. May it be so. Let me pray, and Jessica and Tyrone, would you come? Jesus, you've blessed us so much, but you're not done. You desire for us to keep pursuing. You desire for us to keep seeking. and you desire to keep blessing. You are so good and so worth it. And the church said together, amen.